Hey everyone, welcome to the May 29th edition of Horses to Watch. David Aragona here, taking a look back at three replays from last week at Belmont, at the Big A, at Aqueduct. And I was off last week, so didn't handicap most of these cards. And sometimes that can be the best thing for watching replays because when you handicap the races, then go back to watch the replays, the pitfall of many horse players is to fall into the trap of looking to find excuses for the horses that you liked and horses you bet. So sometimes the best way to watch replays is to look at replays that you really didn't have a preconceived notion or prior opinion going into those races. So that's definitely the case for these three races that I'm taking a look at from last weekend. Let's begin with the race from last Saturday's Belmont at the Big A card, May 25th. It's the fourth race, a New York bred maiden special weight going 6 furlongs on the outer turf course for fillies and mares. Let's break these runners from the gate, and we're going to focus on the number 10, Princess Summer, who you can see in those yellow and blue silks, breaks a step slowly behind the field. And when you watch the head on of this race, which we're not going to show, she actually has a horse veer in front of her at the start, so just really causes her some trouble at the beginning of this race, which puts her way at the back of the pack, and she's going to be off the screen for the majority of this race. I will note that the horse who eventually does win this race is the number 11, Toriga, the horse that is actually leading the race right now. So it's not a race that necessarily came apart and favored a horse trying to close from the back of the pack as the number 10, Princess Summer, was. And you can see her now back in the screen, the last horse all the way on the right. She was a first-time starter for trainer Joe Sharp, a daughter of Mastery. She's a half-sister to a horse named Princess Pinky, who was a turf winner, so definitely bred for these conditions, but just ran and was ridden like a horse who really needed this experience. Joel Rosario was aboard this day, and you can see coming into the stretch here, he's just handling her very lightly, knows that he's probably not going to win from here, just shakes the reins a few times, just has a very light hand ride through this stretch as she's going to make up some ground. And I like the way that she's responding to even this conservative handling through the lane here. She's quickly making up ground, has to navigate around some traffic there, and she's not going to be beaten very far out of third place in this race. You can see her crossing the wire in about a photo for sixth place at the end there. All in all, I thought this was a promising debut for this New York bred 3-year-old filly, and one that is likely to come on for this race. Joe Sharp can win with a first-time starter, but he is a trainer who does tend to have his horses improve with some experience. So I think we're going to see a much more dialed-in professional effort from Princess Summer when she comes back for her second career start. So on to actually the very next race on this Saturday, May 25th card at Belmont at the Big A. Race 5 was a New York bred allowance race, nominators of one other than the allowance condition, going a mile and a 16th for fillies and mares on the inner turf course. And let's break these runners from the gate. We're going to focus on the two bookends to this field. The number 1, MIM, who you can see breaks a step slowly there, and the number 10, Rania, who was on the far outside. Now, focus first on the number 1, MIM, who hopped up a little bit at the start, off a bit slowly. There she is highlighted there down towards the inside as Rania tries to tuck in to save some ground. But you could see the number 1, MIM, her rider, Jose Gomez, is really having trouble controlling her. She's trying to run up on horses' heels, resenting these rating tactics. She is typically a front runner in these longer races, and she did not want to be towards the back of the pack. And you can see Jose Gomez does not want to go forward, but this filly just drags the rider forward to go 4 wide into this clubhouse turn, trying to rush up to lead this race. And that is just not the move you ever want to make to try to have success on the turf, especially in a 2-turn race. And unsurprisingly, MIM is ultimately going to fade to be last in this race. But I don't think this was a performance that is as bad as that result would indicate, because all of that fighting the restraint early and then getting this uncovered wide trip around both turns while just pulling on the rider every step of the way is just never going to lead to success. So I would say this is the kind of performance that you probably just want to draw a line through. Now let's shift focus to the number 10, Rolania, who is towards the back of the pack, right in the middle there in those blue silks with the white dot on the outside. She's making an early move, what I would call a premature move, as she is moving 4 wide around the far turn, losing significant ground as her rider, Javier Castellano, tries to make up for the ground they had to sacrifice at the start by taking her back due to the wide draw. And now she's in a position where she's getting forward at this point in the race, but she already expended all of that energy and that burst around the turn, going wider than other horses. So she just doesn't have a whole lot left in the stretch. Now, also note the number 2, right down on the inside, that horse steadying right there. That is the favorite in the race, who was actually the number 2 first time in forever. She is a horse that I think a lot of people might look 2 as the trip horse coming out of this race, because you could see, and you could even rewind it if you didn't catch it, I was a little late noting it, that she really did steady at the 8th pole of this race. But I thought First Time in Forever got an absolutely perfect trip up until that point where she steadied. She was in behind the leaders in the pocket, saving ground every step of the way. So would she have won without that trouble? Maybe, but she would have done so with a perfect trip. And I think she is the kind of trip horse that a lot of people are going to latch onto out of this race, given that she was the favorite coming in. So I don't know if she's one that is necessarily going to offer value when she comes back next time. I do think Romagna ran better than the result might indicate. She still has not quite run back to the promise that she showed on debut last year when she so impressively looped the field to win against some overmatched rivals. Still has to show that talent now. She's coming back as a 4-year-old, but this was just her second start off the layup, so I do think we could see better in the future. As for the number 1, MIM, who crossed the wire last of 10 in this race, she has put on blinkers for her last couple of starts. I think she's a horse that could really benefit from taking those blinkers off, because you could see in this replay, it just got her way too keyed up. She didn't want to settle. She didn't used to race that way in her sprint races without the blinkers. So I think she could benefit from 2 things: taking the blinkers off and turning back in distance, because I'm not sure that she really wants to go 2 turns on the turf. So we'll see if she shows up in that kind of spot in the future. I don't know if her trainer, James Ferrara, was listening to me, but I do think she's one that you do want to bet back or give a long look to if she shows up in that kind of situation in the future. Now let's wrap things up with one more race from Belmont at the Big A on Sunday's May 26th card. The 7th race of the day was a maiden special weight event going 1 mile 3/8 on the turf for 3-year-old and up runners. Let's break these runners from the gate for this 3-turn affair. We're going to focus on the number 2, Steadfast Resolve, who was closest to us. And you can see his jockey, Jose Lezcano, asking him for a little bit of speed for a few strides coming out of the starting gate. Obviously, he knows he's on a bit of a plotter, wanted to get this horse some kind of forward position, and was just unsuccessful in doing so. It's hard to do that, breaking from the rail with faster horses drawn to the outside, and he just kind of gets shuffled towards the back of the pack because this horse just isn't too quick away from the blocks. But now he sees there's a slow pace developing in front of him. You can just see visually the leaders are kind of meandering along, dawdling up front, and there is the number 2, Steadfast Resolve, all the way on the left of the screen. He is just sort of cantering into the race here, traveling very easily, and Jose Lezcano has a difficult decision to make. You take back and try to get lucky, hoping the race comes apart. Probably not going to, seeing that opening quarter in 26 seconds. Or you do what he's doing right now and try to make this premature early move to get position that you gave up at the start of the race. But he has to do that, making that early move while going around everybody else in the field. And from this point on, he's kind of committed himself to going wide around the turns. And this is a 3-turn race, so going wider on every turn is going to be a big disadvantage in this mile 3/8 affair. Steadfast Resolve, he gets to this point where he's rating outside in 3rd, but I think one thing you do want to note about this race is that the horses who were successful were the horses who saved ground every step of the way. You can actually pick out the trifecta by just watching these horses towards the backstretch and looking for those that were closest to the rail. The top 3 finishers are the number 5, who's leading, the number 4, Hamilton's Way, who ultimately does win this race, stalking on the rail, and the number 1, who's right behind them in 3rd on the rail. He's ultimately going to finish in the trifecta as well. So that was just a very disadvantageous trip to go wide around the turns, given the race flow for a horse like the number 2, Steadfast Resolve. And you can see here, Jose Lezcano is starting to ask him for some run. He's sticking with the leaders for this time, but he gets spun a little bit wider coming into the stretch here. He's just not a horse that corners all that way. You can kind of see he's this big, gangly son of Not This Time, who isn't the most agile type, and he's just going to stay on at one pace. You can obviously see why the connections have targeted a 1 3/8 marathon race for him, because he's just kind of this one-paced horse who's going to stay all day. And he really doesn't throw in the towel here despite that poor trip. He's still fighting out for 4th place at the end of this race, just getting nipped for about 5th at the wire here. All things considered, I thought this was a good second start for Steadfast Resolve, who is still a lightly raced horse. Now, for this race, he was listed being trained by Peter Goulias, who I'm not that familiar with, but he is one of these horses who was a former George Weaver trainee. It's been been reported on DRF.com and elsewhere that George Weaver is currently serving a provisional suspension from Haiwu for a metformin positive. So Steadfast Resolve was forced to switch barns for this race. We'll see which barn he is in next time out, but I do think he's a horse that ran a lot better than the result might indicate here, given that tough situation that he was put in due to the early position, the premature move, and the slow pace. So I think he's one that does have potential to do better as a lightly raced horse the next time that he comes back. So those are all the horses to watch for this week. If you want to follow any of these horses moving forward, you can add them to your horse watch under your account on DRF.com. You can also go into your Timeform US or Formulator Past Performances, pull up the notes feature, and add notes on these horses' trips. Those notes that you make about these trips will show up in the horses' running lines when they are entered back in their past performances for subsequent starts. But that doesn't mean that you just have to follow the horses that I highlighted on this video. You can use some of the principles that we talk about here to find your own trips and make those notes in Formulator, because those notes that you make and those observations that you take away from watching trips are really one of the biggest advantages that you can have as a horse player, putting in that work of watching the trips, and hopefully watching these episodes of Horses to Watch helps you do so. Everyone, thanks for tuning in to Horses to Watch this week.